shrink. This is our national debt in trillions of dollars. I'll show my own age. I remember Ronald Reagan bemoaning when the national debt hit $1 trillion. And that was so shocking at the time. Now, $1 trillion looks pretty good. We're over $30 trillion in debt right now as a nation. Debt by itself doesn't mean that much. You also need to understand the debtor's ability to pay. Like, I'm a professor. If something happened and I'm instantly $1 million in debt, I'm gonna have to declare bankruptcy. There's just no way as a professor I'm paying that off. On the other hand, if Elon Musk became another $1 million in debt, he wouldn't even notice. So your ability to pay really matters. And one of the ways you analyze a nation's ability to pay is what's known as your debt divided by your GDP, gross domestic product, or a measure of how much money that you make each year, wealth you generate each year. So that ratio is a key sign of how healthy your economy is and how easily a nation can repay debt. According to a study by the World Bank, the 77% ratio is the key number. If you're below that, you're healthy. Once you hit 77%, you start experiencing slowdowns in economic growth. And the higher up you get from that, the more at risk you are. Venezuela, which has the hyperinflation and the disaster you've probably all seen in the news for the last 10 years, they're about 300%, so ridiculously high. Here's the 77% bar. The only time the U.S. has been above that, and historically, was when we did the war bonds for World War II, and then we paid those off. Until about 10 years ago or so, we hit that, and we've been going up ever since. So that's a warning sign for economic problems for our nation's ability to handle debt. Of course, if you're like me, you've been hearing this your entire life, and I think there's still plenty of room to go. We're still in good financial shape, but there are warning signs here. The reason this one, it peaked down from 2020 to 2021 is not because we owe less money in 2021 than we did in 2020. In 2020, everything was shut down, so our GDP was much smaller. But once we went back to normal growth, that helped the ratio a little bit for a year. So interest on the federal debt is the fastest growing federal expense. The U.S. estimates it'll pay over $300 billion, about $305 billion interest on the national debt this year. So that's one of the downsides of the debt. Think what we could do across the United States if we had $305 billion we could just use for public works instead of paying interest. This shows what the Congressional Budget Office has estimated interest rates are going to be. Now for 2022, they estimated 285, or it's actually going to be 305. So these are optimistic estimates by the Congressional Budget Office. And they had two sets. Very optimistic, known as the current fall scenario, but that's what they were expecting in blue. And then a slightly more pessimistic alternative in orange. I think their slightly pessimistic one isn't even realistic. But if we go with these, you can see just in under 10 years, we'll be spending about $1 trillion a year just paying interest. I mean, it's really mind-boggling when you think about that. As I said, under Reagan, our national debt was $1 trillion. It hit that, and now we're to the point where we're going to be paying $1 trillion in interest a year on the debt. Okay. So clearly, at some point, growth is unsustainable as for federal debt. There's limits that even the U.S. government, as big as it is, they can't surpass. Once interest, not debt, but the annual interest is a large percent of the gross domestic product, it can never be repaid by normal means. And at a certain point, people quit buying the bonds or quit loaning the U.S. money. So what can the government do? First, it can reduce spending and pay down debt. How realistic do you think that is? I mean, they could have been doing that my entire life. They could raise taxes. That has limited effectiveness. There's a problem with the disincentive to work as tax increases. Many people work 2 jobs, but if the tax keeps going up and you get less incremental income for each extra hour you work, why do so? And you could tax Americans at 100% of their income, and that would pretty much balance today's budget. Wouldn't pay off anything, but we then wouldn't be borrowing anymore this year. So there's a limit to how much you can tax, even if people be willing to work and give 100% to the government. Inflation. That's part of what you're seeing now. One of the ways you can handle if you're a government having massive debt is you inflate away the value so you really owe less than you really owed in real dollars. And this is when you get too much money chasing too few goods, because this also goes, if you print more money or put a bunch of money in, you see inflation, and we're seeing a lot of that right now. You could get to the point of hyperinflation. I'm not forecasting that. I don't see that in the next couple of years. But if we reach the point where instead of having about 100% or 120% GDP divided by debt ratio, it hits to 200 to 300%, we could start seeing hyperinflation. Or the US government could default, just say, we're declaring bankruptcy as a country, we're not going to pay back our bonds. Your crystal ball is as good as mine on which one of these is going to happen. My guess is it's mostly going to be a situation as it's been before inflation, printing more money, and maybe raise taxes a little bit. But I'm not going to predict what Congress is going to do. I just want to present the impact it's going to have on businesses.